So some interesting Impact Wrestling news coming out today, and that is that Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Don Callis, of course he is the co-executive vice president of Impact Wrestling along with Scott D'Amore, but Don Callis is now not being listed as an executive for Impact Wrestling via Anthem. Now this is a really interesting story because there has been discussions and rumors swirling about Don Callis' future with Impact Wrestling for a while now, and it looks like Don Callis could be done as the co-executive vice president of Impact Wrestling going forward. Now, the Invisible Hand apparently is no longer listed on Anthem Sports and Entertainment's official websites, while Scott D'Amore is still listed as an Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President. Now, Callis and D'Amore have been in the role of co-executive Impact Wrestling Vice Presidents since December of 2017, making significant changes and improvements to the Anthem-helmed promotion of Impact Wrestling and have brought a huge resurgence in popularity to the organization. Now, as well as handling the day-to-day operations of Impact Wrestling, Callis also served as a color commentator for Impact Wrestling's programming, beginning at the 2018 Redemption pay-per-view. Ultimately, though, he was replaced by Madison Rayne, but Callis did do color commentary for pay-per-views, whereas Madison Rayne did color commentary for Impact on Access TV. Now, more recently, of course, Don Callis has had a stronger on-screen presence through his affiliation to Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers. Of course, Kenny Omega is the AEW World Champion and the Unified Impact World Champion and the AAA Mega Champion. Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers were in action last night at Impact Wrestling Under Siege, but lost to the team of Eddie Edwards and the Impact World Tag Team Champions FinJuice, New Japan Pro Wrestling's FinJuice. But Don Callis officially turned heel and sided with Kenny Omega at AEW's Winter is Coming special edition of Dynamite in December. And since then, we've seen a new side to Callis, and we have seen in recent weeks on Impact Wrestling on Access TV, Callis and Scott D'Amore have been on different pages in terms of the storyline. So it does bring into question whether or not Callis is still an active Impact executive or if he's just a talent for AEW and is being used as part of this Kenny Omega AEW working relationship going forward. Now, as far as Scott D'Amore, his role in Anthem's website still lists him as being responsible for Impact Wrestling's operations, production, talent relation, and live events, as well as he was obviously instrumental in assisting Impact's Access TV launch. He was also instrumental in Impact's Spike TV launch and the creation of the Knockouts division. Now, in addition to what we're hearing today, managing editor of Fightful, Sean Ross Sapp, has commented on a post on Twitter that was talking about this. He said, quote, "I actually heard something about this today." So it looks like Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful might also be running a story on this coming later today. So it does seem to be a bit of a developing story, and certainly a very interesting story, because I recall last year, and I must, I've been, in some cases, and to be honest, I don't have an agenda or a vendetta against any website or any journalist or anything like that. I just feel that if people get things right, they should be praised for it, and if they get things wrong, not necessarily they should be called out about it, but it should be pointed out that they might have got things wrong. Now, there was a report by Wrestling Inc. last year. It was in December. It was right after the Winter is Coming edition of AEW Dynamite when Don Callis turned heel, officially aligned himself with Kenny Omega as his manager, spokesperson, whatever you want to call going forward. There was a report that came out that said that Don Callis' Impact Wrestling contract was set to expire in January of 2021, and that the plan was that he would sign with AEW as a talent and just work as Kenny Omega's manager going forward. Now, after that, we didn't hear a lot about it. Obviously, January 2021 has come and gone, and we really haven't heard that much about it since then. At the time, I felt that it was a slightly dubious report. The reason I felt it was slightly dubious is because I felt there were details that didn't make a lot of sense or didn't add up there. First of all, if you're an executive of a company, you tend to be an employee. You don't tend to have a contract. You tend just to be an employee, and then if you're going to leave, you have to give your notice and all that kind of stuff. If you're an executive of a company, you don't have a contract that then just happens to expire at a certain date like a talent or an independent contractor. So when that story there, I didn't really think added up. And also, like many people said at the time, and I felt that this was a fair point of view as well, why would you leave an executive position of one company to just work as a talent for another company? And I understand people will say, well, AEW, it's a much bigger company. It's got much more exposure than Impact and all that kind of stuff. That's true. That is true. But you're talking about working as a talent, an independent contractor, as opposed to working as an executive, as an employee, and having all of the benefits and insurances and covers that come with that. So I kind of felt at the time that I didn't know how much stock was in that story, and maybe now we find out that it was accurate. And if that is the case, then Wrestling Inc. obviously must be congratulated on getting the story out there so early and getting it right. Again, it's important to stress when we're looking at this story right now is the only reason people are jumping to this conclusion at the moment is because that Don Callis is no longer listed as an Impact Wrestling executive on Anthem's website. In recent weeks on Impact Wrestling on Access TV, we've seen the storyline where Don Callis and Scott D'Amore have had choice words with each other, and they've kind of come to bits of disagreement because they are co-executive vice presidents, and maybe we might see going forward, we might see a situation where on Impact Wrestling television now, Don Callis is removed as an executive, all that kind of stuff, because in real life he has been removed as an executive. I think we could see this possibly play out on Impact Wrestling television going forward as well. So that's a possibility to consider. If it is, the end of Don Callis' time with Impact as an executive, then it's a shame. He's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, especially while Kenny Omega's still on Impact Wrestling television. As long as Kenny Omega appears on Impact Wrestling television, Don Callis will appear there as well. It's just a case of how much influence he now has backstage. If he's just going to be a talent, and if he's just there as an AEW talent, and is part there as the working relationship, then obviously he won't have the influence backstage that he once had, and maybe that will change things. We don't know. If it is an end for Don Callis being executive vice president or co-executive vice president of Impact Wrestling, for me as a fan, I think it's a bit of a shame because I mentioned it in the report there. Don Callis and Scott D'Amore have really done a real fantastic job with Impact Wrestling. You have to realize where Impact Wrestling was at the end of 2017. And, Impact Wrestling they'd had the Jeff Jarrett era under Anthem, which kind of it had a lot of controversies involved in it because of the, Alberto Del Rio stuff and obviously Jeff Jarrett and the GFW stuff. And Jeff Jarrett had his addictions as well at the time. Thankfully, he's now clean and sober and all that kind of stuff. But it was a difficult start to Anthem purchasing Impact Wrestling. And then prior to that, look, Impact Wrestling, I get it regularly here on the channel, and I get it regularly on social media. When I talk about Impact, or when I do an Impact watch-along or an Impact video, or certainly with this AEW and Impact Wrestling working relationship, I got so many messages or comments or whatever on the channel where people going, Impact's still around? What, TNA Wrestling from back in the mid-2000s, they're still around? I didn't even know it was still a thing. People had just assumed that Impact Wrestling went out of business in 2014, 15, 16 or whatever. People really assume that's the case. And Impact Wrestling, for lack of a better term, was a dead brand. It was a dead brand. They obviously had their peak on Spike TV in the mid-2000s and then slowly, gradually went downhill when I don't blame it all on Bischoff or Hogan or Russo or anyone like that. There was a variety of factors in there. Dixie Carter obviously is partially responsible, Panda Energy, all that kind of stuff. But they had their heyday and they were going downhill. They were rapidly losing money, so much money. And there were the amount of lives that Impact Wrestling has had, they're more than a cat. I mean, they say a cat has 9 lives. Impact Wrestling has about 50 because they have skirted and managed to avoid bankruptcy and going out of business on several occasions. So people, rightfully so, sometimes don't even know that Impact Wrestling is still around, or TNA Wrestling, whatever you want to call it, is still around. And the job that Don Callis and Scott D'Amore had on their hands when they became co-executive vice presidents at the time was monumental. It really was. And there was a bit of criticism, to be honest. There was a bit of criticism towards Impact, towards Anthem at the time, of why would you put Scott D'Amore and Don Callis as co-executive vice presidents? Scott D'Amore, you could kind of understand that. He obviously had a really long history of Impact, working in the backstage scene, working in the office. People said to Don Callis, well, what's he done? He was the color commentator for New Japan, and he was the color commentator for ECW, and was the Jackal in WWE and all that kind of stuff. And I remember listening to a Chris Jericho podcast at the time. And obviously Chris Jericho is going to say this because Don Callis is one of his best friends, but it's a good point of why not? Why not give someone else a shot at it? Why not? Because let's face it. It's kind of when it comes to executives or creative writers or head of departments or directors in these pro wrestling companies, over the course of the last 20 years, it's tended to be the same people, hasn't it? It's always the same people. And this isn't really a knock, but this is how it always tends to be. It tends to be Bruce Pritchard, Paul Heyman, Eric Bischoff, Jim Cornette. Those names just tend to circle, Vince Russo, and they all just tend to circle and go to these different companies and go to these different positions of power. And then we wonder why pro wrestling hasn't really progressed or moved on. Or people like to say, oh, it's still the same. It's a bad version of what we were seeing 20 years ago, anything like that. And sometimes you do have to give people these positions of power. You have to give people opportunities to bring different ideas to the table. And it certainly worked in the case of Impact. The resurrection of Impact Wrestling over the course of the last 3 years is pretty astounding. It really is pretty astounding. And that's partially, we spoke about this on the Under Siege Watch Along last night, that's partially why I do these videos about Impact Wrestling, because I'm a fan of Impact. And I know a lot of people that watch this channel and subscribe are fans of Impact Wrestling too. And the reason why I'm still a fan of Impact Wrestling is because I really truly believe in their content. Their product is really good. Their product is good, and it's just a shame not as many people watch it or know about it. Maybe that's because of Access TV and the limitation of being able to get Access TV and all that kind of stuff, but it's true. I'm a fan of the product, and if you've been watching Impact Wrestling for the last 2 or 3 years, especially since Scott D'Amore and Don Callis came into an executive position in Impact, you'll know that they've done a really good job. A really good job of rebuilding this brand. And recently, Impact Rebellion, that was Impact's most successful pay-per-view that they have done since Anthem purchased Impact Wrestling in 2017. That's steady growth. That's steady progression. And that comes down to Don Callis and Scott D'Amore. Don Callis, obviously, because of his connections with Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho and the connections that he has with AEW, was instrumental in building this AEW and Impact Wrestling working relationship. And if he's no longer an executive vice president of Impact Wrestling, that's his legacy. That's his legacy of what he was able to achieve in Impact, was to build this working relationship between Impact and AEW that has been incredibly successful. Incredibly successful. And I know some people might not like it, and some people think that there's too much AEW influence on the show, or not enough AEW talent gets involved, or certainly I've been critical that AEW doesn't promote Impact enough on their show. There are certainly elements of this working relationship that could and probably should be improved, but there's no doubt about it that it's been successful for Impact. There's no doubt about it. When they've just done the most successful pay-per-view that they've done since Anthem purchased them in 2017, and when Kenny Omega appeared on Access TV that first time, and it was a record rating for Impact on Access TV, it was the highest amount of viewers that they'd ever had on Access. It wasn't the highest viewers of all time, because you're just not going to get that on Access TV, but it was the highest numbers they'd ever had on Access TV. It quadrupled, or even more than that, broke records on their Twitch streaming of Impact as well. It was really beneficial, and it has been really beneficial of getting eyeballs on the Impact Wrestling product that weren't there before. I had it on the watch along last night. I had several people say, you know what, I'd never watched Impact, but because of the AEW influence and the AEW crossover, I decided to watch Impact, and I enjoy it. So if that's Don Callis' legacy with Impact Wrestling as a co-executive vice president, then you have to give him credit. You really do have to give him credit, and we'll wait and see. This could just be a situation where, we are going to get into this in a second, there's some TV tapings coming up over the next few days when it comes to Impact, quite big TV tapings, and maybe we'll just see an angle over the course of the next few days where Don Callis is removed from his role as co-executive vice president of Impact Wrestling because he can no longer be perceived to be impartial or anything like that, because he's in the corner of Kenny Omega and because he had the Good Brothers attack Sami Callihan. This could all just be a storyline. This could all be a storyline, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was a storyline, because like I said before, when this original report came out in December, apart from obviously the money and maybe the travel and all that kind of stuff, I can't see why you would want to go from being an executive in a company, regardless if it's smaller, but going from an executive position in a company where you would have your insurances and your covers and your dental and your health insurance and all this kind of stuff, where you would go from that to being an independent contractor talent that just cuts promos. I mean, you might make more money, and maybe he doesn't want the workload of being an executive anymore and all that kind of stuff. Maybe he just wants to be a talent and relax and still make decent money. Maybe that is the case, and we don't know the full ramifications, or we certainly don't know the full reasonings of this, but I just struggle to believe that you would want to go from an executive to being an independent contractor. On top of that, your contract if you were an employee, your contract doesn't expire. You have to give notice. So again, I think there are certainly details of that story that still don't necessarily add up to me, but we'll find out more over the coming days. I have no doubt about that. Maybe the initial report was that Don Callis had given his notice at that point, and he was going to finish up in January as an executive vice president. Who knows? Who knows? But certainly this is a story that, as I mentioned, that Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful has spoken about, and it certainly is a breaking story. So once we hear more or we get confirmation or anything about it, we'll talk about it here on the channel. But certainly interesting that Don Callis may no longer be co-executive vice president of Impact. Finally, what I did want to talk about, and I mentioned this briefly on the watch-along and the streams that we did last night. Fightful Select, we mentioned Fightful there, Sean Ross Sapp. They are reporting that Impact Wrestling will once again be taping content for Access TV this week, as a 4-day taping schedule is planned. So far, the company has filmed every month of this year, which was different than last year. With the amount of taping they're doing this week, they'll have the entire month of June off. The talent will come back for the week of Slammiversary for more tapings. Now, obviously, Under Siege was last night and was filmed at the last set of TV tapings, so it can be presumed that the next Impact Plus event Against All Odds will be part of this week's set of Impact Wrestling television tapings. This isn't anything out of the ordinary, to be honest. As I mentioned, they do the tapings every month. They tape the block of TV for the month, and then they also tape the Impact Plus event. And then whenever they have to come back for a pay-per-view, they come back, do the live pay-per-view, and then the days after, they film all of the fallout of that, and they film the set of Impact. They film the set of Impact television tapings and the next Impact Plus event. I would think the reason why they're doing all of this taping up front now in May, and they're going to have the entirety of June off, is because they're trying to figure out what's going to happen and what's going to go on. Obviously, they're going to have some former WWE stars come in around Slammiversary in July. That's a given. That's going to happen. So I would think it's probably smart by Impact Wrestling to go, you know what? We've got the creative, we've got the storylines, we've got everything mapped out right now. What we need to focus on right now is getting these deals done and getting these deals over the line, figuring out which WWE stars are going to come in, because at least one will come in. We know that's a fact. Impact have teased it. So whether that's Chelsea Green, whether that's Mickie James, whether that's the Iconics, whether that's Samoa Joe, whether that's Kalisto, whether that's whoever, they've got to figure that out, and they've got to work on those deals. So if they get the television stuff and they get all that content out of the way, they can focus on what their plans are in terms of talent coming in terms of plans for Slammiversary, and also plans for contract renewals. Obviously, Moose won last night. He's the new #1 contender for the Impact World Championship. He's going to be facing Kenny Omega at Against All Odds, which is going to be taped over the course of the next few days. So they've got to figure that out as well. I would assume if this is going to be taped over the next few days, Kenny Omega retains. I suggested that they make it a title versus career match. It writes Moose off of television, but he can always come back if he re-signs a contract, and then he can maybe face Kenny Omega at Slammiversary, and maybe Moose wins the championship there. I don't know. But if they get all of this television out the way, then they can focus on, okay, let's re-sign Moose, or let's get in negotiations with Moose. Let's get into negotiations with these ex-WWE talents. Let's get all of this stuff that needs to get achieved now. Let's get all of this stuff done now. So it's a big set of TV tapings. Those TV tapings for Impact Wrestling are kind of marathon tapings. I think the biggest one that they did was last year in November. They taped pretty much like 6 weeks worth of television over the course of a few days. So this isn't anything new. But if you do, I would probably, I guess a disclaimer here might be that if you do think that the Impact Wrestling product over the course of the next few weeks, especially heading into June, does feel a bit rushed, or maybe not making a lot of sense, or maybe a bit bland, that might just be because they're kind of just like, okay, let's get this television taping out the way, let's get this Against All Odds out the way, and Slammiversary is the big event. That's what they're heading towards. That's the big event. They obviously had huge success with Slammiversary last year because of those WWE talents coming over. They were trending worldwide, which for Impact is a real big deal. And obviously they know that Impact Rebellion, as I mentioned, was one of the most successful pay-per-views that they've had in a real long time. Certainly Anthem Sports' most successful Impact Wrestling pay-per-view. And they realize that this is a real big opportunity here with Slammiversary to possibly do even bigger business than they did at Impact Rebellion. So I think they realize, okay, let's get these television tapings out the way. Let's get Against All Odds out the way. We can focus on Slammiversary. Then we can do some real big things, and we can make some big money. And also, I mean, we just spoke about Don Callis there. They might not know what the situation with Don Callis being an executive of the company. They don't know what the situation is with Moose, his contractual situation. They're trying to figure out getting these WWE talents to come in as well. So it's all just very busy for Impact Wrestling right now. So maybe that's the case of like, okay, let's get the tapings out of the way. We've got some other stuff to deal with. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Don Callis possibly no longer being an executive for Impact Wrestling, and also the huge set of Impact Wrestling television tapings coming up this week? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. It really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.